Right now in Sudan, anarchist comrades are organizing in the middle of a war, repression, and displacement. The anarchist group in Sudan is building mutual aid, grassroots committees, and political education for survival and liberation. And they need our support. You can stand with them by making a one-time donation, holding your own fundraiser and sending the funds to the Open Collective, Support Sudanese Comrades, link in bio, or become a monthly supporter at that same Open Collective link. Every contribution strengthens their ability to keep resisting and caring for their people. Solidarity means action. Tap the link in our bio or in the show notes and support the anarchist group in Sudan today.
Welcome to the Dugout. Today we bring you a conversation with Isabella, an internationalist who's been involved in the revolutionary project of Rojava. Together, we'll trace her journey from their early life to joining and supporting the Rojavan Revolution and the networks of institutions that have sustained it through the decades of struggle. We'll explore the Mala Jin and the Jinwar and how these initiatives are reshaping women's lives. We'll dive into Jineology, the science of women's liberation, and its role in building structures, publications, and guiding revolutionary practices and thoughts. We'll hear about Kongra Star, the vanguard of the women's revolution, and strategies that have challenged patriarchy while fostering collaboration and care in the community, while redefining what leadership and being in power with people means. Our conversation also examines the broader political landscape, the media ecosystem in Rojava, the role of democratic confederalism and the Syrian Transitional Government, as well as some of the ongoing negotiations in the conflict and war and invasion that is shaping the region today. Isabella shares reflections on the Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria and the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the Kurdish Freedom Movement, while offering insight on the current realities on the ground and where people can stand for them. Thank you so much. This episode was recorded on the 27th, and we wanted to get this out to y'all as soon as possible. It's find in the show notes some more ways to get information, different ways to get involved, especially if you go to our Instagram and you go and check out the Rojava Information Center so that you can stay up to date, and some of Kongra Stars as well to stay involved. We hope this reaches you well. We know this is a time of intensity for a lot of us around the world, and our solidarity and our ability to show up for each other, where we're all facing down some version of authoritarianism, fascism, paternalism, patriarchy, and its control over our lives as we guide ourselves in a world free or freer of such domination. Stay safe, stay dangerous, and I hope you all enjoy this conversation. Who are you, and how would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Isabella. I'm an internationalist here in Rojava. I came to Rojava almost 2 years ago. I'm originally from the US. Since I've been here, I have been in a few different structures of the movement. Came here to Rojava to learn from what this revolution has done, the achievements, the accomplishments, all of the structures that they've built, especially for the achievements of women. Also, just the way that they've created their autonomous administration and the system of communes and all these kinds of things I came here to learn from. But originally, and I still am part of the Filipino movement. I organized with Gabriela back home in the US, kind of building solidarity between this movement and in this capacity. I come here on my own, though not on behalf of Gabriela, but on my own as an internationalist to learn from the things of this movement, and not just the revolution, but just the Kurdish Freedom Movement in general, because there's really, really valuable things and lessons to learn from what this movement has created and what it's continuing to do.
So what was a young you like?
When I grew up, I was exposed to a lot of things. I grew up in California. I was a really, you could say, curious person, because just all around me, there was just a lot of diversity, with my family, within my friend groups. I think I really quickly took to, asking questions about stuff. I was kind of born an anarchist, you could say. I don't know, I would ask my parents questions all the time of why aren't things free and stuff, or why isn't everything free, or blah, 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 stuff like this. And yeah, I think the younger me, if they saw me today, they would be very impressed. Honestly, they probably wouldn't even think that I would become doing what I'm doing. Would say, yeah, I was raised in this way that I was really curious about the world, but also giving a lot of empathy based on my life experiences and my family and everything like that. But yeah, I'm probably more empathetic since I was a child.
What is the Rojavan Revolution, the Rojavan Project, specifically the project of the Democratic Autonomous Administration of Northeast Syria, kind of relating that to like the Syrian Revolution, the Kurdish liberation struggles. There's going to be lots of notes and show notes for people to get like a very to fill up their knowledge on it, so don't feel like you have to do the point by point, timeline by timeline, because that's something that other people have done, and we're going to recommend that people go listen to. And yeah, if there's any resources that you want to give us to make sure get out there, we'll definitely make sure it's out.
Okay, for sure. Okay, yeah, because yes, there are a bunch of books, honestly, and I would say the best book actually is The Kurdish Women's Movement by Dilar Dirik. That is a book that actually, honestly, like motivated me to even make the decision to come here in the first place. The Rojavan Revolution is, I mean, it's a huge accomplishment and achievement of the Kurdish Freedom Movement, but actually it's just a part of it. And that's something that I learned after coming here, because the Rojavan Revolution is kind of like culmination of like all these things that the Kurdish Freedom Movement has like went through over the decades, and how they were able to change their paradigm from going from a Marxist-Leninist Maoist sort of like ideology into becoming democratic confederalism. The Rojavan Revolution is the embodiment of that, of this in practice, trying to move away from states. This is something that Abdullah Öcalan, the founder of the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, has completely transformed the ideology of the PKK to be away from building a state. And so that's what the Rojava Revolution is essentially trying to do with the creation of the autonomous administration. What that entails is basically the system of communes is like the most important form of governance, you can say, like self-governance, that the people themselves can implement in whatever region they're in whatever tribe affiliation, whether they're Kurdish, whether they're Arab. This is something that can be implemented without some kind of central governing body. And so, yes, the revolution tried to implement the system, and there were shortcomings for sure. And there's a lot of things to be critiqued, but also from what I've seen here, like people really put in effort. Like some communes were much stronger than others, like neighborhood communes I'm speaking about. Yeah, it really just depends on like how much people are empowered to empower their communities. And this is something that I think the Rojava Revolution has really tried to get people to be empowered for governing themselves. A huge achievement that you honestly don't see anywhere else in the Middle East is the liberation of women. This is something that is also that the PKK has like instilled in their ideology since the 90s, before they changed the paradigm into being like the non-statist sort of like ideology. The real, like we could say, liberation of women that's not rooted in like liberal feminism or still reaching for power or patriarchal mentalities, but like actual genuine liberation for women. This is honestly something that is probably the most important thing that this movement has put emphasis on. Specifically here in the Middle East, the situation of women in Syria, but also just in the Middle East in general, is really difficult. They face a lot of oppression, and also in the West, we also face oppression, but it's influenced by different factors, still the patriarchy, but I guess like the flavor of like patriarchy here in the Middle East is so intense that it's kind of a miracle actually that even this women's liberation ideology was even able to be implemented here. And also that's not without shortcomings, and that's not without great resistance from like a lot of various communities, more by like Arab tribal communities. This has also faced resistance from them. But not just that, even within like the Kurdish community, there's a lot of, you could say, social conservatism. Like this is also very heavily a thing in the Middle East and Syria, especially in the midst of this revolution being created in the midst of war, and specifically against ISIS. How it was able to survive this, like how it was able to get through ISIS, get through Jabhat al-Nusra, get through other these kinds of like, you could say like Takfiri Islamist like groups that were, have a hard line when it comes to women and stuff. But this revolution was able to like push through this and break through it. The Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, that is like the armed wing of the autonomous administration. No, they were able to defeat ISIS in this region back in 2019. They officially defeated them. And for the women's achievements, like the achievements that this revolution has made for women, there's no going back. And just some examples of like what they've even done for women. So there's Kongra Star. You could say the women's movement. They broadly call it this, but it basically is an organization, an autonomous like women's movement that I don't want to say trains, but like they really motivate and activate women politically in the political sphere. Basically, under a Kongra Star, there's like various organizations and stuff For example, the co-chair of the Autonomous Administration of the Executive Committee, Avin Suede, she was formerly the spokesperson of Kongra Star. In this way, they kind of are like building women politically. And then under Kongra Star, there's also the Mala Jin. The Mala Jin is something I could talk about forever, honestly. It's a structure that I was in for 3 months. The Mala Jin is like basically a restorative, transformative justice system, you could say, of the autonomous administration of the revolution, where it's does reconciliation for not just women, like also families, because Mala Jin means women's house, basically in English. It's kind of this system that was created to help women and like families and with domestic problems, maybe even like just various problems. Like, but it's just something outside of the non-carceral system, you could say. People that go to the Mala Jin, they go to the Mala Jin because they have problems with their marriage or something like this, so that they don't have to go to the court. For instance, there's many problems that can be solved through the Mala Jin that don't require going to court. Because also in the society here, people don't really do that. Like, they don't really like to go to court. Like, unlike in the West, where people, take each other to court all the time for like many problems, and they really get the system and the state involved. And like, basically, the Mala Jin is trying to not have people take that route, and people don't want it. They don't want it. So, so the Mala Jin is under Kongra Star, the women's movement, and that's one of the biggest accomplishments that I could say this revolution has like achieved. There's this village called Jinwar. And Jinwar is a women's only village. There's many reasons why women come to this village. Women who are basically escaping maybe abusive situations. Women who, let's say, their husbands fell martyr, stuff like this. Or also women that just want to come and live autonomously in this village. This village was created for women like this to come. They also are like financially autonomous. It's like a farm, and there's like 30 houses. And women of all different kinds of races and religions and all this like come to Jinwar. This is something that like is probably one of the most inspiring things of this revolution, because the diversity, like there's women that have been displaced many times because of the war situation against Rojava, like people from Afrin, that's like the super western region that was lost in 2018, and a lot of women from Afrin that live in Jinwar, for instance, women from Kobani, women from Deir ez-Zor and stuff like this. And one thing that I also found is so beautiful is that, there's like women that are not just Kurds, but there's Kurds, Arabs, Alawites, Yazidis. They all live together, and they don't have, I don't want to say they don't have problems. Like, there's problems for sure, but they don't have like problems that if you are looking at the news of Syria right now and you're following the narratives that is being talked about between the Syrian government and Rojava, basically there's a lot of racism and sectarianism, and it's really heavy. But this is like a really patriarchal dominated media. But then there's a place like Jinwar that's just like this oasis that is existing here in Rojava, where that stuff actually doesn't exist. Like, you don't really see the sectarianism or racism amongst them. Like, that's not being lived there at all. Like, they have other problems for other reasons in terms of like the main narrative of what's going on in Syria and how it's divided and all of this. Like, it really is just dispelled going to this village. And there's many reasons why these women are like working together. A lot of it is because maybe they don't have another place to go, but at the same time, they're really living the principles of the revolution, because also the ecological aspect of it, just a lot of the sort of, like reconciliation, restore transformative justice type things are also living these principles. It's just ordinary women, it's not like women that are necessarily like have been with the Kurdish movement. It's just women that end up there, or they willfully go there, and they're turned kind of into revolutionaries by the way that they're living. And also, working together, living together, taking care of each other's kids. Everybody has like some kind of responsibility for something, whether it be gardening or doing the farm work or taking care of the animals or just various stuff. And so, that is, I would say, the most inspiring thing of the two things that I think need to be stressed when we're talking about the Rojava Revolution. It's like, yes, the communist system is great and stuff, but I think for the women's movement, like Mala Jin and Jinwar are like the two things that I think is most important.
Starting with a bit of a grounding and talking about like the women's revolution in Rojava, and often described as very foundational and not secondary. And I kind of want to know, like you were talking about Abdullah Öcalan, but I'm curious, like what, like there's been like formations of like Jineology, and I'm curious how that kind of related, or what type of foundation or streams of thought that's creating as something that seems separate from like Western feminists, and even I'm curious how it relates to even like more popular conceptions of more radical Black feminism.
So genealogy is also another structure that I was a part of. Yeah, so Jinwar, the village I just mentioned, is actually connected to the structure of genealogy. Genealogy is basically like the science of women. That's what it would mean, translated, genealogy. Genealogy was created, I don't want to say defense, but basically all throughout history, the science that we've been studying and consuming and learning is male-dominated. And it has a patriarchal narrative. And it's been mainly men that have crafted the story of the history of evolution, and all of these things. And so genealogy was created to give a like women's narrative of this, a matriarchal narrative, because there's just a lot of things like dismissed in society as not, or dismissed in history as not important, or just rewritten, really, like things have been rewritten in history because it was a male dominated narrative that like wrote these histories and stuff. And so genealogy is really trying to go back and do research and like actually gather information without assuming a male dominant narrative. It's kind of hard to explain. This is what genealogy was kind of created as. This is like the basis of it. And this is something that Abdul Öcalan did write about in the early 2000s when like in prison, in Raleigh prison. And yeah, he was kind of thinking about these things of like, oh, like after he was reading history and sociology and all this stuff, and was realizing like actually the narrative of like how society and civilization was created is completely based on assumptions of these historiographers and these men that like a lot of times would dismiss things as not significant just because it was women that were doing it. And so from this is why he suggested, okay, there needs to be a science that is like led by women and more studied about women in general, like in history. In genealogy today, like how we're seeing this is, yeah, basically we do our own research on various topics, various things. Yeah, we kind of write our own like research, reports, brochures, stuff like this. And it's not just in Rojava that like the genealogy exists, also in Bakur, in like North Kurdistan, so like in Turkey. There's also like a genealogy committee. I mean, in all 4 parts of Kurdistan, there's the like friends working on genealogy, but also in Europe, they have a genealogy committee that is also doing research because it's also connected to the cultural context that you're in. Like, for instance, the people in Germany that are a part of the genealogy committee, like they're also doing research and writing reports and brochures and stuff like that, but it's based on German history. Or maybe they'll research on like German folklore. Like, oh, why did this story come about? And it's actually through talking to older women, through going through archives of like their local city's library, they can craft a narrative and, you know, put pieces together, rather not just craft a narrative, but like actually put puzzle pieces together to come up with the full story. And that is what we're doing also in genealogy here in Rojava. Like, for instance, one thing that when I was in genealogy that we did was we tried to research women's communes. Here in Rojava, like there was some women's communes, not so much. They were actually kind of trying to start this again. We weren't just researching here. We were also researching from other movements, other liberatory socialist movements, and just throughout history, like what has been the existence of women's communes. There's just various like examples for this. We even reached out to like friends in Myanmar, for example. I reached out to my organization, Gabriela, in the Philippines, to also pull from these movements. And then, yeah, the friends like that I was also working with, they reached out to people in their countries, like in Scotland or in Germany, to also grab narratives there. And in the end, we wanted to make a brochure about all this. Like, what is women's commune? What does it entail? What are the values that bring it together? Why was it created? We still are working on that, this research to publish it, but that's just an example of a project that genealogy would do. That's kind of in a nutshell what like genealogy is about, like just to give some concrete examples of the kind of work that is being done. And yeah, I'll also just say that, yeah, I mean, I already mentioned that there's not just genealogy existing here, but also in Europe, there's a committee. I know that friends are also working in South America, trying to get it started there. Because it's not just spreading the narrative of Kurdish feminism or anything like that. This is like specifically to the context of where women are living and like the history of those regions, like and how women have been in history.
Talked about genealogy kind of less like an ideology and more like a structure. And I'm kind of curious about that, and also kind of like where is some of this reporting coming out? Kind of like where some of this reporting is coming out, because I know that it was something that universities that were being built was something that was studied or had a program around. So I'm curious,
Mhm.
like what the extension or like lifeline of that looks like materially.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say like genealogy is a structure that like people can join into here and do the works in. And I don't know, for me, like I kind of just explained it in this way because for me, like I've like examples rather than speaking. So that's kind of why I also said it in this way. Like for instance, the University of Rojava, they have a whole, you could say, like major that you can major in for genealogy, because it's also not just doing your own research, but it's also really big on methodology. This is something that genealogy really is teaching and is trying to spread is the kind of methods that are used to do research, and that's the whole part of changing the narrative so that it's not positivist. So positivism is something that Abdullah Öcalan like has critiqued so much about in his books and his writings and all this stuff. Genealogy is trying to move away from that narrative and have a not positivist view. Positivism, just like a short explanation, is like more statistical, you could say, more this kind of data, like material data. But then it's also something that you could say like also making a lot of assumptions, like in science that we see, because maybe not seeing the full picture or making assumptions saying, okay, if I see this in history, how it's been in history and how it's been in like science, is I'm not going to take that part. If there's an anomaly, let's say, in my research, I'm not going to even consider it because I don't think that it's important because it's not fitting my narrative.
I mean, it seems like it's more of a purely quantitative data, and like qualitative data and non-replicatable things don't inspire more research. They inspire just a re-examining of your methodology so that it fits into something that's you're able to recognize the pattern of through qualitative data instead of being able to balance qualitative and quantitative data. I might have said them wrong, but I feel like you get it. Or people, hopefully people get it.
Yeah.
The vibe.
Yeah. No. Like, yeah. And, genealogy, like in the methodology, for instance, something that they would like give a lot of value to, for instance, talking to an old woman of a village that has lived there for her whole life or lived in the region for her whole life. And like, instead of, I can only speak to like also what's happened here really in Rojava is like, there's a lot of archaeological sites around. A lot of archaeologists came to the region and did research and stuff, and then they unearthed things. And then based off of this, they make assumptions on how it was during that time. But maybe they failed to ask people of that region if there's a story about things. Like they don't want this oral history. They just want this this material thing, which is whatever they found. And then based off of that, they're making assumptions, but they're not actually talking to the people in the society that is around. And so, yeah, genealogy would be doing this, not just looking at, like doing both things though. But yeah, like really valuing other methods.
Kind of getting into more of like Kongra Star from the way that it talks, like it seems like Kongra Star is in the way that they behave, it seems like they're operating kind of like the vanguard of the movement without dominating, kind of like how the sectarian left, especially in the West, but I don't gotta say that. I think the sectarian left everywhere has kind of defined the vanguard party. And I'm kind of curious how you explain what that looks like when talking about movement work or a part of Kongra Star being a part of the movement.
Yeah, I mean, Kongra Star is about the vanguard of the women's movement, actually. And yeah, like how I was saying before, is that like a lot of women that were in Kongra Star end up in other positions in other places. What Kongra Star basically does, like, yeah, it sets women up to be able to organize autonomously, but at the same time, it kind of strengthens women so that they can. So one thing that the movement in general does is they do education. And Kongra Star holds these educations. Like sometimes it's a couple of weeks, sometimes it's a few months at a time. They hold it for themselves. So like people that are members of Kongra Star can go to these educations depending on which section or which kind of work that you're doing. And they also give education for various structures. They are really ideological. They talk a lot about the paradigm of Abdullah Öcalan and also, yeah, democratic society. Like there's like various lessons that like every education will have. So they give these educations, and they also, yeah, kind of like prepare women so that when they go to other positions in, say, the autonomous administration or other organizations, they're like, I guess you could say like strong, because they don't want, I mean, yes, it's really important for women to organize autonomously, but they also understand there has to be equality. And so, for instance, like here in Rojava, every position of the autonomous administration, there's a co-chair system. So there's always at least one woman and at least one man. So the women that go to Kongra Star are basically preparing to be put into these positions. And so, yeah, they're kind of like prepping women in a way to be able to like hold their ground, hold the line of like being a woman representation, but in an ideological way, you know, not just in this way of, you know, liberal feminism or just for representation. Like, it's not about that. It's not just about representation of women. They actually want a woman in power that, or not power, but in a position that is like ideologically like can run it. And same with the men as well, but like specifically Kongra Star is a structure that does this for women on the diplomatic part. Like, for instance, women that are working in various diplomatic works, whether it's for Kongra Star, whether it's for the administration, or maybe they're working with an NGO and they're doing diplomatic works, Kongra Star will host an education session for this. And that could be, like I said before, like anywhere from like a couple weeks to like a few months. So people of all these different structures will send from their work to attend these educations and get more familiar with the women's line in these kinds of works. So yeah, I don't know, that's kind of like, I would say, a pretty important thing that Kongra Star does. And then they also do their own diplomatic works. They do a lot of diplomatic works with movements outside, like other women's movements and stuff like that. So that also Kongra Star is kind of like, they can like lead certain projects, for instance, like if they want to like, let's say, I mean, any structure can kind of do this, where if there's like a humanitarian convoy, for instance, that's going to another part of Syria, or something like this, like they'll organize stuff like that, or they can rather. That's kind of in a nutshell. Like, I don't know, Kongra Star can be an anomaly sometimes with the many different things that they do, but then also like they have some like pretty concrete foundational stuff that they do, like the education and diplomacy, like I was speaking about.
How did the initiative start?
So actually, no, Kongra Star existed before the Rojavan Revolution. In 2005, it was founded. This was existing here in Syria. Before, it was called Yekatiya Star, which means Star Union. But yeah, it kind of had the similar work of activating women politically, and educating them and teaching them how to like lead and be a leader. But yeah, this was back in 2005 where it started. And this is like back before the revolution started, obviously. And that's a lot of, I would say, some of the structures here in the autonomous administration of the revolution. Some of these like already did exist before. Also, through the revolution, they became empowered and had their own special role. But yeah, that's history of Kongra Star. And also, one more thing I should add: Kongra Star does not only exist in Rojava. It's also kind of like the Jineology, where in different places of the world, where mainly where there's a strong Kurdish movement, they have a Kongra Star. So like also in Lebanon, for example, there's a lot of Kurds in Lebanon, and Kongra Star exists there. And they do similar stuff, which is, empowering women politically and stuff like this.
One question that we got from folks here who are trying to do a lot of like rematriation work, but having a problem with getting it through some people's skull what that actually means. Even if we can read a book, actually putting it in practice seems to be some of what folks are fumbling through, and there's a lot of inspiration folks have from the women's revolution. What concrete structures make this possible? Like, my friend's exact question was, how do you get men to listen? That was their exact question, so I'm just gonna ask their question.
Actually, that's a good thing that you mentioned this, because that's something that I completely forgot to mention, which is that Kongra Star also does put on educations for men. And it's very interesting. This is like something that I really wanted to attend, but I never had the opportunity to. But yeah, this is something like they basically kind of help, like for the men that attend these educations, they're also sent there from different structures, like from different structures of like whatever institution or organization that they're a part of. And they're sent to these educations because it's ideological, but also it kind of helps men examine. Like, I want to say like it just completely eradicates the patriarchal thinking within men's minds or anything, but it definitely at least helps them kind of analyze the ways in which they've thought about women, about like just analyze the ways in which they've acted patriarchally that maybe they weren't aware about. But on top of that, it does also teach about the paradigm, specifically the women's liberation ideology. I've also heard that, yeah, in these educations, it's the women that run these educations, they have to have a lot of hope, let's say, because there is a lot of basically, yeah, like just patriarchal mentalities and arguments and things like this that appear in these spaces. And also just to like mention, like influence of like Islam is like heavy. And so this is also something that is analyzed in these kinds of educations that people just never, like, these men have like never really analyzed it before. You know, it doesn't completely change somebody. I mean, maybe it does definitely change like men for sure. And when they go into these educations, but it's still a long way to go. But at least it's like opening up this door in general, like outside of Kongra Star, like in general in this like revolution, there's been like hella resistance, you could say, against, like, women really have to fight for their rights, basically. And it's a constant struggle, you know? I mean, yeah, like women have gained like a lot of achievements, but in general, like it's not just like, okay, like they've made their co-chair position now, or now there's, yeah, the existence of Kongra Star, there's the existence of Jineology. Like, no, still people are fighting against this. So it's not completely accepted, especially in other regions where there's more like kind of like tribal influences or stuff like this. So it's just going to be a constant battle. Honestly, I think that's something that we all need to like come to terms with, is that like there's never going to be like this level of, I guess, like complete liberation, or like especially on the topic of women and stuff. It's like always going to be a constant process. So yeah, like it's also people like they're not listened to and they have to really force their position and stance.
Yeah. Yeah, when my friend asked that, my first reaction was, I have a feeling they're going to say something about the women's councils, the women's communes, and having an armed women unit. It feels very important to being listened to in the society. And curious, like, what other strategies you feel like have worked in shifting some of the deeply rooted patriarchal attitudes? Earlier, you were talking about like the collective education, and then kind of also talking about the Mala Jin and about like conflict resolution and like institutional power play, or how that works.
So one thing that I just want to add also in terms of like women being listened to and stuff like that is like, I would say that one thing too that like women are very empowered to do is basically empower themselves enough to like build a revolutionary personality, build a strong personality, so that they don't have to listen to like the opinions of men, or they don't have to like, yeah, and it's so much focusing on the women improving themselves and being empowered. This is way more important than trying to convince men, basically. This is like what the whole ideology of what the women's liberation ideology is about, what Abdullah Öcalan has written about. Because like that much like a woman is strong, then that much of society can be strong, basically. And we can't just wait for men to listen or change their mentality. It all has to start with the woman. So that's something that is highly like practiced here, like, and also taught in the ideology. One thing that I would say the movement does is like, for instance, the creation of like the YPJ. This is a structure that women can go to and be autonomously in this like women's only militia army. It's just like you do things, and then from doing them, you gain the confidence, you gain the credibility. And this is like something that this movement has like kind of forced their way to do this. They're just going to do it and start it, even if it's not the right time, and it'll happen and it'll be developed. Like, I mean, yeah, just this women's revolution happening in the midst of when ISIS was here and all this stuff. Like, if they were going to wait for a right time, then they would have waited forever. And so I think just starting and doing things, but also, I mean, there is a level of society, like, obviously accepting this. Like I was saying, the Mala Jin, for example. For instance, like, yeah, I mean, I always said earlier that society actually wants something like Mala Jin here because they don't want to go to, like, courts and stuff like this. But still, like, people have always critiqued it, like people saying that, oh, Mala Jin, it's only for like a place for women to go to get divorced and stuff, for example. I mean, that's a huge thing that like the Mala Jin works on, but there's a lot of like critiques like this from society, or like even on Jinwar, for example, like people just don't believe that a place like this exists. Like they would say, I don't understand how women can even live autonomously in the village. There's no way that they're like living like on their own and stuff. I think at the end of the day, like, we can't let the opinions of like men in the society to like rule and dominate over this. And that's also kind of why it's so it's such an existential time for the women's movement right now, because it's in the midst of war, and you know the new government has a really statist patriarchal mentality, that could really put some of these things at stake. There's so many accomplishments and achievements, but from the existence of these women's autonomous structures. So yeah, it is kind of like a crucial time right now, I would say.
Can you describe the media ecosystem there in Northeast Syria and kind of how that works? Because I know there's things like I'm going to butcher some of these names, like the Harwar News Agency, the North Press, the Renahi TV, Urta FM, the Rojava Information Center, even Kongra Star. To me, I always saw as, not always saw, but like always really appreciated their information and media work and have followed through that.
Right now, while the region is going through war, everybody's following the news. It really does depend on who you're looking at, like which news that you're reading to get what is actually happening on the ground. And that's something that, the Rojava Information Center, for example, is something that really tries to get accurate news. All of the news here, like some are independent and some are like with the movement. Like Rojava Information Center, it's independent. Hawad News, they are with the movement. Now, that's not to say that like they're inaccurate or anything, but you can get more, you could say, propaganda type stuff from places like Hawad News, and even to some extent Ronahi TV. They just do news on all of Rojava basically, and same with Hawad. And there's also just local journalists working there, like Kurdish people or Arab people, and I believe Ronahi TV is actually only in Kurdish or Arabic. It's not in English. But this is more so people in society here watch that like on TV. Like it's mainly a TV show. And then same with, there's just another media called Sterk, which means like star. And this is it's like a Kurdish news source, you can say. And it covers all parts of Kurdistan and also the like Kurds in Europe. There's a huge diaspora from Kurds in Europe. So that's like another big TV channel that people watch here. The Hawad News, like they have a huge presence here. They have a lot of correspondents and journalists on the ground. There's also a couple of other media, like there's a North Press Agency. This is a media that is like, it's funded by the coalition to defeat ISIS, which is led by the US. So the US like funds it essentially. So there's news channels like this. But and then also going back to Rojava Information Center, it's not just news, like they also do research. So not just reporting about what's happening, but also documenting things, doing various research to write bigger reports on things and stuff like that. And working with like the UN, for example, not working with them, but like giving them information, or helping other journalists that come here, and stuff like this. Like there's kind of a bunch of things that the Rojava Information Center does. And then there's also just a bunch of different NGOs that do various research in general, documenting things or doing just various research projects, but those are mainly NGOs.
So how do you feel that people are defining or understanding independent media or autonomous media as a formation or as a need?
I mean, honestly, right now it's very needed, having an independent media, because right now what we're seeing like in the situation of war is there's a huge media war going on, and it's really hard to know what to trust. Even sources that you've trusted before are inaccurately reporting things of like things that are happening in the war, because it's also a rapidly developing situation. And I think news organizations are really quick to put out what they hear, and then later on it becomes debunked. So like I think it's really important right now, even amongst local people, to really examine which news that you're looking at. And what's also hard is that, I mean, most of the local people like here, they read Arabic news in Arabic. And so these kinds of channels like have a narrative for sure. Either they're pro-government or they're pro this project. But most of the time it's not. And most of the time it's like, we could say, enemy media, crafting narratives and propaganda for the Syrian Transitional Government. So it's really needed in times like this, places like the Rojava Information Center to like accurately report things. It's truly like so much. It's not even just inaccurate reporting and fake news, but it's also on these channels like the sectarianism and the racism and all of this like is so bad right now. It's like it's probably like at its all-time worst in Syria. Just the absolute hate speech that is being spread about Kurds, even against like Arabs. The media has definitely been used as a tool of war in this war as well. So it is like really important that people are looking to accurate news and double checking sources. Also, another thing that's been happening recently is like old videos have been coming to surface, old videos back when ISIS was around in this region. And people are saying, look, like this is happening again. And it's like, okay, that actually was from 10 years ago. This video, it's not verified. And then, yeah, so that's just something that's like happening right now. That like, I know like the people in Rojava Information Center have been like really verifying this information. Because at the end of the day, like there's a huge threat from the transitional government, whether they're affiliated with ISIS or not, they're still doing crimes against humanity. And therefore, these things need to be like accurately documented.
I guess before I start getting into the current material conditions, still speaking on the revolution, or at least some of the things in practice, for people unfamiliar and also kind of giving an update on the importance of it now in the region, is how would you explain democratic confederalism? That is something that is talked about, because especially as here you're talking about more of like thinking about like more like democratizing society, and that seems to be a big thing in the Kurdish Freedom Movement in general. So curious how you see that playing out.
I kind of mentioned a little bit before, that it's all based on the system of communes. This is something that in the ideology of like democratic confederalism is like the main unit of society. This is something that was also like taught within like the paradigm and within the movement here. And like basically everything is supposed to start in the commune, and it has to be the smallest unit. How I see that playing out here is, like all of the this past summer, there's been a call by the autonomous administration to sort of reinvigorate the commune system again, because this is something that was created, in the beginning of the revolution. But there were some communes throughout the revolution that have like been really strong, and then there's some that just like have never been used at all. I was looking here, this whole reinvigoration of the communes is, every one day of the week, every Saturday, is supposed to be like the commune day, and everybody's encouraged to go to their communes, and within their communes, there's some of them, if they're well organized, they have like committees, you could say, committees for ecology or committees for health. So the various committees that exist within a commune, whether it's ecology, health, safety, or reconciliation, and there's like other ones depending on like what is needed of the commune. And so every Saturday, people go to their communes, and they can join in on these committees. Sometimes there's meetings in the communes. It's made up of many different households. Like it could be like up to like 100 families, like in one commune, for instance, which is actually kind of a lot. But I think it's kind of based on the situation and the needs of if another commune can be built. Like if there's enough resources and manpower, you could say, to like maintain another commune, then they would. But I think it's just based off, given like the situation of like how it's ended up this way, that there is like 100 families to one commune, for instance. Basically, people are able to join in whatever committee that they want. The commune is also for stuff that the society needs. So, for instance, they need bread, so that the commune would be able to administer this to the society. We use mazut here. It's basically like unrefined petrol, like unrefined gasoline, you could say. And this is something that is used a lot in houses because, for instance, during the wintertime, like now, there's these like, you could say, gas heaters, gas kind of stoves that are in the living rooms. People use the oil for this. And so that's something that's like really needed a lot of times. And so that's something that the commune will administer. And also the commune does a lot of administrative things too. If you wanted to get a divorce, for instance, then you can go to your commune and actually do this. But then if it doesn't work through the commune level, then that's when people go to Mala Jin. Sometimes people just skip the commune entirely and they go straight to Mala Jin. Yeah, stuff like this is supposed to be through the commune, actually. People will do administrative stuff like this. Like if the commune has a reconciliation committee, then if there's any problems in society, like say, I don't know, like, okay, my neighbor borrowed money from me and he hasn't paid me back yet. Now I'm gonna take this to the reconciliation committee to figure out like how we can solve this, and also like having a guarantor, I guess, so like this kind of third person in the party to like ensure that things are like enforced. And so the reconciliation committee of the commune would take stuff like this, for instance. And so really the commune is supposed to be the place that you go to instead of the state, essentially. Like when you have all of these needs, not just needs, but just societal relations and stuff like this, like it's supposed to be through the commune. And so, I see it here for sure. Like people are using the commune system, but I think the shortcomings are that there's too many people to one commune, so that it kind of spreads the capacity thin for a lot of things. But also, I think it's still a shortcoming that society doesn't necessarily feel empowered enough to go to the communes. They don't see the value in it. And that's something that needs to be really stressed. I mean, there's some communes that work really well, that have a lot of involvement, but then there's some that people just drop by just to get bread or just to get oil. And like, that's not what the movement wants. You know, the movement doesn't want the commune to be charity. They want it to be a place where people feel like they can give back to their community and help their community and be a part of it, like run it themselves, essentially. So yeah, it is pretty inspiring, honestly, like seeing how this commune system can work. But it also requires a great deal of empowering the society to govern themselves, also making them believe in the democratic project, because that's something that also I think is a shortcoming, that people don't actually believe that this is a more democratic way to live, because I think the state mentality, and all of us, I mean, like all of us in the West for sure, but majority of the world has this state mentality so embedded in them that it's actually really hard for people to see otherwise. This is something that we have to undo in ourselves all the time, thinking like, oh, I just wish that there was just one person that can make the decisions, or, oh, I just wish there is like a state that can help me with welfare or whatever, you know, like we have these kinds of things in our minds that like we just want the state to do it. And this is how people are sometimes looking at the commune, like, oh, we just want the commune to do it. But it's actually like, okay, you have to be like also a part of the solution. And yeah, that's something that the communes have the ability to like get people out of this state mentality, but it's still going to take so much time, honestly, to like it also makes me think like, okay, how is the commune going to work in the West when we've had this state mentality in us? It's like something you have to like exercise out of your body, like out of your mentality, honestly, is like getting this state mentality out of you, along with patriarchal mentality and stuff as well. Yeah, that's something, if there was to be commune system, this would need to be worked on. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of some of the union organizing and union trainings that I've done from like the Jane McAfee organizing for power things that my union had sent me to at one point, like the National Writers Union. And a big part of what they said was, and something that we kept forward into our internal trainings for the union, was the union is not a vehicle for you to get what you need or a service-based organization. It's a place for you to come together to build, or to come together to solve the problem or to address the problem, and trying to think about it in more of that revolutionary sense. And like, I feel like that's part of like what would be very hard in the West, is like even unions here, like we're so far from that.
Also, just to add one more thing about the communes, is that here in the Middle East, and especially in Kurdish society, there's already this aspect of society that people are obligated to help each other. Like if somebody dies in the family, or like if your neighbor's like family member dies, and the whole neighborhood would come together to make food for you for a week. Yeah, let's say a neighbor's son is injured and needs like help paying for surgery, then families would come together, like pull up their money and, you know, give it to the family in need. Like these things already existed actually in the Middle East and in like Kurdish society specifically. And so the commune kind of is a structure that formalized this process. So in some ways it actually is somewhat easier, you could say, that a commune system would start in the global South versus in the West, because of these ways that society already was before.
Yeah, I kind of want to go into like, what are some of the material conditions in the Northeast Syria right now, just for ordinary folks, like food, housing, healthcare, water, electricity, displacement. And then I guess especially in the context of this war and this invasion from the Syrian Transitional Government, especially because, I mean, I was just thinking, looking up where Jinwar is, it seems like it's right in the end of Hasaka canton, like right where, it just seems like right where they're pushed up to, and where the rear guard is. Yeah. Or at least not even the rear guard now, vanguard of the front line of the engagement right now.
Right now, it's a pretty dire situation, honestly. The material conditions of everybody following the war situation, like huge swaths of territory has been lost because the transitional government has basically made their way into this region, but also the SDF, like the democratic forces, they've also withdrew from a lot of places because they find it not, I guess, like valuable to really hold on to some of these places that maybe didn't even want them there in the first place. And so it's not just they've been like intensely fighting at these fronts, they've also just been pulling back because they find it not as valuable as saving other places like Kobane or like Kamerslo or something like this. And so because all this territory is being lost, this also has created a mass refugee displacement. And there's been just hundreds of thousands of refugees really arriving into the region because these people don't want to be governed by the transitional government. So they're coming into the autonomous administration areas, and most of them are Kurds. I would say majority of the people are Kurdish people, but also the Arabs and stuff. In Qamishlo, for example, like there was like when fighting was really breaking out in the south, like towards Raqqa and Tabqa, there was just hundreds of cars, convoys of cars, people, refugees who actually some of these people have been displaced like a fourth or fifth time in their life because of war situation. And right now, a lot of these families, these people, these refugees that came into the regions that have not been taken by the transitional government yet, have been placed in any space that's possible, like even like empty apartment buildings, schools. Schools also stopped right now completely because the refugees are now like in the schools, but also like during war situation, schools kind of stop anyways. People have been displaced to any place, empty place possible. Honestly, it's like, and even people on the street as well, like just like sleeping in their cars, or there's been like tents that have been put up. Also, and then people are also staying in this, and mind you, this is like winter time, and there's been snow, which is like super rare actually for this region, but this is also something that has been hella affecting the conditions of everybody. Actually, 5 children just passed away in Kobani because of the harsh winter conditions, and because there are also refugees that fled other regions to go to Kobani to seek refuge there, and they're just running out of food and water and electricity. Like there's actually none of this there anymore because the Kobani specifically is under siege. It's being completely surrounded by the transitional government forces, and they're not letting anything in. Like there has been a few humanitarian aid trucks that have like gone there just recently, like just today, I think, today and yesterday, but it's still not enough because we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of people. And then so that's in Kobani, which is more like in the west, but then for the rest of the Jazira Canton and like you were saying, the Hesike kind of Canton, there's a lot of refugees here. And also like for Jinwar, I actually just spoke to someone today to ask about the situation because in the past, when the front line has come close to that village, they've actually all left the village. And so I asked someone there today, like if what the situation is, have the women left? And she said, no, actually, they're still there. They taken up arms and are defending themselves like the rest of society. All of society here has been taking up arms. And they are taking like watch, you could say, like just always having somebody like at night, like awake and taking turns to keep track of the perimeters, anything, the cameras, all this stuff. So yeah, they're ready to defend, I guess. But anyways, there's not really much else to really go to. Because if they go to a different city, then anyways, maybe the fighting will get to that city. And so I think they've kind of just made the decision, we're just going to stay here and defend ourselves to the very end and to see what happens. But it is honestly a pretty risky situation right now. We're following it closely. And I think there's a lot of worries throughout like of what this war is like doing. And there has been humanitarian aid that has like made its way into the region, but we don't know for how long. The situation is very, very dire. Like cities they're just overflowing with refugees, and that's taking a lot of the logistics, you could say, like all of the food and the oil and electricity, everything. We're kind of just like, how long is this going to last? Because there's like currently a ceasefire in place between the SDF and the transitional government. Basically, the only reason why there's this ceasefire is because the United States is emptying or taking out all of the ISIS prisoners that were in the control of the SDF and moving them to Iraq. And so for this process, they were like, okay, we're going to need some time before you guys start fighting again. Otherwise, this is going to get really messy if these ISIS prisons are, broken into. And so we're just holding our breath, really. Like, okay, after this ceasefire, because it's only a 15-day period. And so far, we're like, I don't know, maybe 3 days in. 3 or 4, I can't even keep track of time anymore. Once this period ends, then we're thinking that, okay, this war is going to continue. Anything's possible, but it would be a huge problem if, because right now, like Kobani is under siege completely, but there's other regions like Qamishlo and the Hesika Canton, like we were saying, that still have a border access to Iraq. And this is kind of what's been letting supplies and stuff like that through. There's a worry that if this border crossing gets taken by the government forces, then actually this region will also be under siege as well. And then we would really not have food or whatever until the war ends. And we don't know what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. I mean, I can say this already that like with this much territory that's taken, like a lot of structures are completely gone now, you could say, like a part of the administration. The existence of this project of the autonomous administration is also under question. People don't think that it's going to exist basically anymore. Now, there's hopefully some agreements that are going to be made between the SDF and like the transitional government to see like in what capacity can this region have its own governance. But that's still not clear. These are still negotiations that are being had. But yeah, it's an existential moment for sure. And already some things have been taken and gone, and it's honestly quite mournful. But you know, everything's still developing, so we can't, like, anything can happen really. But as it stands now, the situation is pretty bleak materially.
It seems like the Syrian Transitional Government is extremely hostile to the political project in northeast Syria, and their rampage and blitzkrieg into the north. It seems like they've specifically been targeting administration buildings, flags, and other things that they can that are any sort of symbology of the political project and its history.
Yeah.
I guess I want to go into, can you at least give a bit of a context of who the Syrian Transitional Government is and kind of how it relates to, I guess, the political projects of Syria in this current moment?
Yeah, for sure.
And
So,
how it relates to
you know,
Kurdistan. Not just to frame it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like the new government, like basically after Assad fell, after the regime of Assad fell, and is now taken over by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the HTS organization, and that's who is running the transitional government now, headed by Jolani. He goes by Ahmed al-Shara now. But yes, this person was the founder of Jabhat al-Nusra, which was like a wing of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And so basically, yeah, let's say this guy has a history of being a part of terrorist organizations, and now he's the president of this government. You know, people were hoping that after the fall of Assad, because Assad was also hostile to this political project, he was also hostile to Kurds. Obviously, I mean, we all know how bad Assad was, like in general in Syria, civil war, all of that and whatnot. And so there was a hope that after he fell, that this would be great. You know, a lot of people were cheering. It was like a happy time. And like across Syria, what we've seen though in the last year since this new government has taken power is nothing but worrying, you could say, actions. Because after this transitional government took power, then they committed a massacre against the Alawite communities. This is a minority community in Syria that is like on the western, sort of on the coast. They committed massacre against them, killing like, I don't know, hundreds of people, like civilians. And then in the summertime, there was also a massacre against the Druze, which is another minority group that's in Syria, that's in the south. And so then everyone was thinking, okay, the next group that they're going to be after is the Kurds, because Kurds are also a minority group here in Syria. And sure enough, like this kind of came true, but it's not even just about the Kurds. He definitely didn't want this project to exist. The thing is, during the civil war, Syria became so split up, you could say. There was this autonomous administration here. There was the Syrian government areas. And then there was also this area that HTS was thriving in before, in the northwest. And so one of the goals of this transitional government of Jolani was to unify Syria again. And that means the autonomous administration cannot have its own project here in the corner of Syria. Like they cannot have their own thing. Like this has to be like a centralized state. Like that's what, you know, Jolani wanted, a centralized state. There was always negotiations that have been going on between like the autonomous administration and the government since Jolani took power, basically, to say, how can we make this work? Because the administration was heavily pushing for decentralization of Syria. Like they said, this is the only way to go with like all the diversity in Syria. Like, this is the best way to do it. Like, we don't have to have a centralized state. That's not what Jolani wanted. And this is essentially what this war is about. Because after all these negotiations for the past year, nothing was reached, really. Both sides can want to make any concessions to the other, which is fine. I mean, I think, like, they just had different goals, you know? But then that meant that, okay, Jelani saying, if you guys aren't going to accept my proposal to become a centralized state, then we're going to force it upon you. And so, yeah, the huge thing is an attack on the whole revolution and the administration and the democratic project and everything. In a nutshell, though, this is like what this is all about. And that's
a bit of a narrative question I have. I feel like there's a conversation that puts the Syrian revolution and the Northeast Syrian like autonomous administration coming from that at odds with each other. And I feel like there was a lot of competing information around, and especially something that we have to deal with campus here that were very pro-Assad, but like I guess like also like dispelling myths or clarifying people saying like the project might have been safer under Assad, or they had agreements. This next step or this engagement of these like processes that are happening, I guess you put it in a context.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of thing to analyze. No, like, I mean, I think in general, like when Assad was around, like, I think the reality is that he actually couldn't really control anything. Like, like that was I mean, obviously with authoritarianism and brute force and all this stuff, like he tried, and but in the end of the day, he was defeated because of the absolute forcefulness. Like even people in his military and stuff, for example, like they didn't want to be there; they were forced there, and so that made it kind of easy to try to, I guess, fight against. There's many, I would say, reasons of why people think that the Rojava Revolution came to be. Like why it was why did Assad let it happen, but I think the reality is that it just like birthed out of a really unstable time in Syria, and it took advantage of that, and it was able to build its own autonomy. It is a shame, like campus leftism and everything, and people having supported him before. I mean, I really don't know what people, I mean, I think that campism is being highly critiqued right now, in general, like given like what's going on in Iran right now, for example. But then also, I think after Assad fell, like I think campists were kind of like, who do we support in Syria? And they didn't want to support the Rojava Revolution because of various things and stuff, but also it's not within their ideology, like this whole democratic project of like non-statism and everything like that. It's not in their ideology. And there's other contradictions for sure to be had. But one thing that I hate, this narrative that I see, is that the administration or like the Rojava Revolution, like the movement, worked a lot with Assad. Because, this region and Kurds, they have a whole history of being completely oppressed by the Assad regime. So I think it's just absolutely a tired narrative that's like not really true that people are saying, especially campus, when they want to discredit this movement. Because this is not true. I mean, you talk to people here, like on the ground, like local people who have lived under Assad, and they can tell you stories about how they were arrested by the regime, how they were tortured, how they, like, literally Kurdish people were not even able to get, like, an identification card. They weren't considered citizens under Assad's regime and stuff. To even say that, like, Assad was ever, like, kind of helping this movement or the Kurds or letting it happen or anything like that, I think is just false, because of, the experience of the people here. And I think it's complicated though. No, like I think in general, like things in Syria, like the politics, everything, it's complicated. There's no black and white. Like there's always just gray area, and to like parse through that is like definitely need, like nuance, you could say, is needed.
Jelani put out the stuff around like right as the war was starting about the Kurdish language and citizenship being granted through a special decree or whatever, but still, to what it seems like, is not in the Constitution. And I'm curious, what are some of the political points or demands from the Autonomous Administration or SDF that the movement is trying to make and is standing on?
So people are not seeing this decree as anything legitimate. They honestly find it pathetic, because it's like, yes, if you were actually going to protect the culture and the language and rights of Kurds, then you could have put it in the Constitution. So they've also just, Autonomous Administration in the like negotiations and in general, since the transitional government came out with a new constitution last year, has actually been asking for a redrafting of this constitution in general, like over and over again, even before this decree, all of that. Like we've been hella asking for this constitution to be rewritten because it doesn't really necessarily protect minorities, like not just Kurds, but also the Druze and Alawites. They really want it in the constitution that these cultures will be protected. This presidential decree honestly means nothing. Like the people here really just scoff at it because they do not believe that this would do anything to actually enshrine the rights of Kurds, like on a more constitutional level. That still needs to happen, essentially.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on. I guess lastly, is there anything that you wish more people understood about the Kurdish freedom struggle and just like our overall lessons that you're processing or striving to build a deeper relationship with?
I mean, I'll just say a few things because, right now, like this is an existential time for the revolution and stuff, but honestly, it's not an existential time for the movement. the Kurdish Freedom Movement has been through so many, just a lot. Like, they've been through times where they've had like a liquidation phase. They've been through times when, I mean, even the leader of the PKK was arrested, and like they've also been through paradigm changes and a lot of repression from the Turkish state and all of this, and they still survive to this day. And it's honestly incredibly inspiring. Like, despite if this revolution comes to an end, the movement will not end. Honestly, like the Kurdish Freedom Movement will never end, and it's already done so much for the rest of the world, not just Kurdish people. I mean, I'm just one internationalist here from the US, but there's been hundreds and hundreds of internationalists that have come over the last almost 15 years to join this movement, because to join this revolution, but also to learn from the movement. It may be really sad and depressing, like looking at the news right now and seeing, Rojava Revolution, it's, it's being lost right now, but this is not the end of the movement. I mean, like, there's no way to end this movement, basically, the Kurdish Freedom Movement. If anything, like, I think that there's going to be a different form that this takes on. I think there's probably going to be more efforts put into the international aspect, people really spreading this ideology in their own places, in their own struggles and liberation movements around the world. In general, like, once everything is all said and done here, like after the war and everything, I think there will be some serious self-reflection, critiques, and just a whole analysis that will become much clearer after everything's all, once the dust settles. I think right now it's not really the time to do all this, because we're still in the thick of war, and it is still an existential time, not even just for the revolution, but also for Kurdish people, all the other minorities that are here, like Syrians, Armenians, and whatnot. So after everything's said and done, like, I think that there will be more of an analysis, but there's a lot to learn and had to take from this revolution that is going to be valuable for all revolutions, whatever ideology it may be. We just need, as leftists, to actually take lessons and not repeat history. There's a lot of valuable things that we could take from this and improve our struggle.
I mean, as they say, it's not over till it's over. And I guess if there's places that you want folks to put their attention to, you can shout them out now, or you could send them to me later, and I can make sure that we do the effort of boosting them individually.
Yeah, I mean, right now I could say like Rojava Information Center for sure is putting out the most like accurate information right now on things on the ground. But also in terms of like helping, I know Havasor, which is the Kurdish Red Crescent, they are accepting donations, and they're doing more medical health work. And so I can also send the links for this, but yeah, those are kind of the two main things that I could say to follow along with and put some energy towards.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored, honestly, that I got to speak on here and share what's going on with more people.